This is The Strategy Inside Everything. I'm Adam Pierno. The Strategy Inside Everything is the podcast for people who think for a living. If this conversation gives you an idea, leads to a question, or makes you want to push back on something you hear, go to that'snotaninsight.com, where you can leave a message or send me a voicemail. The best and most interesting will be added to the future episodes, and I can't wait to hear from you. All right, welcome back to another episode of The Strategy Inside Everything. This one has been a long time coming. My guest today is the Chief Experience Design Officer at VMLY&R, Craig Elimeliah. Craig, how are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. Craig, I think I started this podcast in like 2017. And I think in either 17 or 18, I DM'd you and we're like, do you want to come on the show? And you said, yes, like with an exclamation point. And then we never were able to do it. So 2022, it's happening.
It happened. Yeah. Yeah. Think about social media. You get a lot of those messages, and I typically have like an enthusiastic kind of response to those things. And they're so in the moment. And then like a minute later, the world is crumbling around you and you just kind of think, so I'm glad it's finally happening.
Me too. Yeah, but yes, you're right. If I did like a live stream show, I think I would probably get more of guests like you that are like, I'm responsive right at this moment. Let's go. Hit stream and let's do it.
Let's do it now. Right.
Life has to be more structured than that. So, Craig, I am really looking forward to our conversation because you independently offered up something that I'm super passionate about on my own. So I wanted to dive in with you because of your expertise. But before we do that, could you give the listeners a sense of who you are and what you've done before getting into your current role?
Sure. Bit of a long journey. I've always wanted to be in advertising. As young as I could remember, I was memorizing every commercial I saw, sort of intuitively understood the strategy behind most of the ads that I looked at. And I was judging work, as young as I can possibly remember. I remember like thumbing through my mom's magazines and looking at ads and being like, this doesn't make sense, or wow, this is pretty cool. So I've always kind of been really plugged into the industry and just ads in general. And even as a young teen, I was designing ads in school and kind of distributing them, to my friends and stuff, just to get responses, just to kind of see like what resonated with people, and not even knowing what I was really doing. I was just kind of doing it for fun. It kind of really helped.
Your hobby was consumer research?
Basically. It kind of scratched the design itch. I was always a designer. I was always drawing and kind of putting things together. And it kind of scratched that itch for me. And for me, like design and feedback, right? Like what else do you need, right? But then I took a little bit of a different path. After high school, I actually moved to Jerusalem, and instead of going right into college, I actually entered rabbinical school. I was studying Talmud in Jerusalem with some of the biggest sort of Jewish sages at the time. Kind of an interesting journey. But even there, it was the art of critical thinking. It was really like, learning how to think, learning how to question, learning how to feel, learning how to look, learning how to observe. And I think that's what kind of drew me to wanting, I'm Jewish anyway, so I was kind of connected to my heritage, but at the same time, it was more of an intellectual pursuit than anything else, because I wasn't super religious. I was more just connected to like the pursuit of wanting to really just learn deeply. And I continued kind of doing the same thing there. I was still designing things, and I always had a sketchbook. I was always cutting things out of magazines and reconfiguring them. And at that time, the internet was just starting to take shape. And when I saw that, I was just like, oh my God! Like I felt like I've been waiting for this my entire life. Even as a kid, I was a big gamer. I always had an Atari, a ColecoVision. So
I can tell we're the same age.
Yeah. So once the internet hit, my brain just connected all the dots, and I just really, it all came together very clearly for me, which, I think for the most part, in my career has been a little bit of a challenge, because I've always kind of been ahead of things, because I was one of the very few people in the city that was both into design, and I taught myself how to program HTML. I sat with a book in my lap, and I learned JavaScript, and I learned HTML, and I learned a few other technologies, some backend technologies, and it was rare at the time, and I got a really good, well-paying job as a creative director at an agency. I didn't know what that was. I didn't know what the role entailed.
That was your first job?
Oh yeah. I was way underqualified. I had no clue like how to lead a team or, but I knew I was really passionate about the space, and nobody else knew how it worked. So it was just like blind leading the blind at the time.
Well, you knew more than they did.
I did, right. I did know more, at least in the craft. So some of my first projects were like BMW and PricewaterhouseCooper, AT&T. I like designed like one of the very first page navigations for AT&T, like not knowing any like sort of best practice of anything. I just kind of like, I winged it and they loved it. So it was like, okay, yeah, I guess this works. And then, and then that day came where the whole thing came crashing down, right? Like it just kind of came crashing down, and the agency went under. And I was still a believer. I was very naive at the time, and I was just like, this is not going away. Like, I don't care what the markets say. I don't care what anyone says. Like, this is healthy, right? Like, this is just a reset. So I looked around and saw some talented folks, and I was like, you know what? Let's keep going. So I just started my own agency. Small design group. We picked up some really good clients. We started, not just doing, advertising. We were building software, right? Like I actually built one of the very first ERP systems for the fashion industry. Actually built a whole suite of software. So it was great. It was sort of all coming together at a very young age, where design and technology and insight and strategy and it just sort of kind of worked itself out for me. And that was sort of how I got into the industry. Very shortly after that, I joined a digital agency called Firstborn. They were pretty well known at the time. They were, joining up with them, we knew no wrong. Like everything we touched was gold, right? It was just like, we were winning award after award.
Yeah, they had a great run.
Yeah, we had a really good run, and we were benchmarking ourselves against folks like RGA and some other folks like that at the time. So it was just a great time to be in the industry. I learned so much. I made a lot of really close relationships, and for me, that was kind of how I broke my teeth. Before I entered the agency world, like sort of the big agency world, the holding company world. And I've been really, really fortunate in my career to have had roles in which I was really able to be all of those things. I've never been told by anyone that you can't be a designer, you can't be a technologist, you can't be a creative director, you can't be a client service person. And, and even now, my role at VMLY&R, it's funny. I actually saw our head of HR yesterday. He was introducing me to a new person on the team. And he's like, I want you to meet Craig. I don't even know what he does, and it was funny. Our global head of HR was like, and that's a good thing. Like, I love that he just does so many different things, right? I just learned so much every single day, and just fortunate to be at such an amazing agency surrounded by really smart people, and doing what I do, which is creating experiences for some of the biggest brands in the world.
That's really cool. That's a really cool background. I would imagine the left turn you took towards the Talmudic studies and the critical thinking came with a model for respectful, questioning. So you're able to question the document, you're able to question the thinking, but always holding at the center this like unspoken respect that we don't have to take the thing apart and break it to ask questions of it or to try to better understand it. We don't have to deconstruct it, but we do want to understand it more deeply.
That's right. And that's exactly right. And that's what I sort of attribute a lot of my success to, just in regards to my partnership with my clients and with strategy, right? Like being respectful when it comes to truth and intellectual honesty, and really, going down a path that I think we can all, respect in terms of making sure we're doing right by our clients, we're doing right by our agencies, we're doing right by our people. So yeah, that's exactly that.
Yeah, that's really cool. So in your role, you have switched, I mean, you're covering a lot of different, or your work touches on so many different things. There's technology, there's creativity, there's comms, there's people and client management that touch your work, or that your work touches actually. And what you and I were chatting about was this idea of, getting the creative team to have that same sort of curiosity and understanding of the end user, the person they are creating for. Yeah. How have you started implementing that, or how have you been implementing it?
Yeah. I mean, I've always been obsessed with dimensionalizing who would be using the output of anything that I've done, right? Like anything that we make, anything, whether it's an app, whether it's an ad, whether it's a banner, whether it's a CRM platform, whatever, big or small, I've always really obsessed over kind of like, how is this going to be received? How is this going to be, and how does it fit within the larger context of that person's life, right? Mm-hmm. And I always tell my clients, you shouldn't benchmark yourself against your competition. You should benchmark yourself against your customer's next best experience, right? Yeah. And the idea is that like, nobody's like drinking a can of Coke and then drinking a can of Pepsi and going, oh, I like that, right? Like that's not how it works, right? Like it's, and I think I've always been really obsessed with like sort of contextualizing the moment and really understanding like what else is going on. What are the other things that are happening in the life of that person when they're looking at that piece of work or interacting with that moment that our brand wants to connect with them in, right? And so when I kind of work with my teams, be it my account teams, my strategy teams, my client teams, my creative teams, it doesn't matter. I always start there. I'm always sort of like, let's kind of like quickly whiteboard, like, who's our customer? Like, oh, Jenny? Let's meet Jenny. Let's get to know Jenny. Who is Jenny? Like, what does Jenny do? Where does Jenny live? Does she have kids? Is she married? Does she have a partner? Is she single? Like all of the things, and trying to uncover who Jenny is as a person before we even start ideating, before we even get into our brief, right? And we really, really kind of go deep around like, what do we know about this person? How much of what we're doing is sort of coinciding with the other things that are happening in that moment that Jenny's alive, right? So, that I think that's I start there, and then of course, you try to bring in as much data as you can possibly bring in.
Yeah.
But I also try to approach it as a person as well. Like, what would I be like if I met Jenny? Like, how would I greet Jenny? How would I react to Jenny? How would I, what would I talk to her about? What would I offer her? How would I, where would I, if I was inviting Jenny on a date, where would I invite her to? Things like that.
Totally. And what would she be interested in, and what would she run away from?
Exactly. And I think unless you've contextualized that very, very, deep human moment, that human truth, you really can't start thinking about an idea, right? Because, I think we so often create things for ourselves, right? Yeah. And, you kind of like, I've never been sort of that creative that just throws shit against the wall to see if it sticks. I've always been very thoughtful about the roads that I would go down based on, the fact that I really respect people's time and I really respect what it takes to come up with a truly great insight and a great idea. And yeah, you can get lucky, but I don't rely on luck. I really rely on that human truth and using that to help lead us down a path that I think, will net us out the most success.
How has it been? Is this something new that you're bringing, or is it a practice that has grown with you at your time at the agency?
It's grown. It's grown. This is not new. I mean, we've been doing this we've been doing this type of stuff before it was popular, before it was trendy. This is not, for us, this is not performative. This is really our process. We get very serious about people. We really spend a lot of time dissecting people, observing people. I encourage my teams to get out there and to really observe more than anything else and come back and talk about what we've observed.
That's part of the key. The part of the key is you can't just have one person go out and observe. That's an anecdote. But if everybody comes back after a week of observation and they can all come back and say, oh, I saw this, or I noticed this, then all of a sudden you're building a matrix that then you can go test.
Exactly. And like I've sort of, I'm always the guy in the room that kind of is blowing up, the linear journey, right? Like there is no linear journey. Like nobody wakes up in the morning is like, I'm going to consider something today, and then I'm going to research it today, and then it doesn't exist. Like, show me one person that lives their life based on like a consumer journey, right? Like to me, it's like you said, it's a matrix. It's a very complex, set of nodes that are all intertwined with one another. And I see it more as a graph than anything else, almost like a decision graph, and, you think about things that matter, moments, motivations. Like I said before, like what are other things that are going on in that person's life? And then another thing that's very important to me is culture. What's happening in culture?
Yeah.
Right. At any given moment, there are times where we'll get down a certain path and I'm like, guys, let's get on Twitter right now. Let's just go like, what's going on?
Yeah.
Like, what is happening right now? Because guess what? Like, we're trying to sell someone a car and there's a war in the fucking Ukraine right now. Like, consider that in a person's life. Consider the fact that like, there's an election or there's a weather issue or there's a famine or whatever, right? Like, so there are things that, there are things that factor in that I think that are oftentimes left out. And, again, ideas created in a bubble never really resonate or break through because they don't have any cultural resonance, right? Like there's nothing connecting it to reality.
Yeah, it exists in a vacuum. And then we wonder why nobody picked it up.
Right. Exactly.
What kind of, when you're trying to figure out who Jenny is, what kind of data have you found not useful for you, but maybe more useful for the creative teams that you're trying to inspire and motivate? Is there a particular data source or is it varied?
Well, it varies. I think with every assignment, you try to bring, everyone loves, like you have your first party data, you have your second party. For me, it's kind of like, how do I uncover some of the less obvious signals, right? Like, how do I uncover some of the less obvious signals? I'm a big believer in nonlinear data. I love to look at pictures. I love to look at social streams. I love to look at, comment sections. I love to look under those rocks that people just don't typically look under. I think that's where all the nuggets are. That's where the gold is. I mean, I've built a career on doing that, like, coming up with really good ideas, all based on looking in places that other people really just don't want to bother looking, right? Like, I've even gone so far as to build products that do that. At my time at Omnicom, I actually have some patents on products that are able to use things like computer vision to identify things that are going on in an image, and kind of create a little bit of a taxonomy around that, and keywords, and start to look for trends and look for things that are happening in a very wide spectrum of imagery, that you can easily run through an algorithm and then quickly get back some data that can help inform an insight that you would never have seen just looking at sort of first party data.
And you couldn't process that many images yourself mentally and figured out what they have in common or what's disparate.
Exactly. So like I've been so obsessed with that I've actually like built products.
That's cool.
At some of the agencies that I've been, just to do that, because there are times I'm like, oh my God, I just need to see like 1,000 things and I'll figure it out. But like you said, I can't look at 1,000 things at once.
What is the team makeup of the people that are helping you gather that data and collect? Like it's not just you and the creative people in the room and a really good Wi-Fi connection. Who else is helping you look at the data and sort it?
Yeah, I mean, we've got experience strategists, we've got researchers, we've got brand strategists, we've got data analytics folks. We've got a whole swath of folks across a number of different disciplines. Like I said, every assignment obviously, requires a different sort of, starting five or depth of bench, in terms of expertise, But I mean, I sit in the creative department, but like, I don't think anyone at my agency would ever tell you like, that's where I am. Like, I'm typically like entrenched in I just don't see those boundaries. Like, to me, it's one team, one dream. And, we try to pull in as many people as our, our clients can pay for, because I do believe that there's so many different, there's so much value that every single person can bring to the table, and I try to involve as many people as possible so that we can uncover a lot of that stuff. Clients don't always have budget for research. They don't always have budget for an experienced strategist.
I know.
Things like that. And it's like sometimes I'll figure out how to sneak them in. Sometimes I'm like, I'm a crafty accountant. Like I'll figure it out.
I'll take 4 hours of this time and move 4 hours of this time out. Yeah, I know. Exactly. And you have to get the work done the way you want.
You have to, and there are times, you barter, I'll tell a creative team like, hey guys, listen, let's hustle on this, because I need to shift some time over to get those guys like moving on some of the, research that we need, or some of the data we need, or some of the modeling we need done, right? Like, and so we get it. Like, we all understand the value that we all bring. So we're all willing to kind of, cut corners where we can in order to help other folks get involved.
What sort of insight or data does the creative team seem to respond to the best, or what have you noticed makes the biggest aha for them?
Yeah, I think it's a lot of the less obvious stuff. I think when you, like I said before, a lot of like the nonlinear stuff, you come in, it's sort of, I think with like first party and, like a lot of the media stuff, I rarely see stuff that we don't already know. We're like, yeah, we knew that. Like, we could have guessed that, right? Like, it's almost like, but when you can do some interesting social listening, and you can do some interesting sort of extraction of nonlinear data, and you can bring that to the table, and it's like, by the way, did you guys know that most of the people driving these pickups tend to like also have like 3 kids, and the second kid usually has red hair? Like, what? That's nuts. Like, how did you know that? Holy cow, right? Like, something weird like that. It's not so much the data point. It's the sort of the awe that you were able to uncover that inspires creative, because all of a sudden they're like, what? That's so
what else?
Weird.
What else can you tell me? If you could tell me that. Yeah.
Exactly. Right.
I love finding stuff like that.
Exactly. And sometimes I force it, because it's I don't necessarily intend to like ground the entire campaign in that one data point. I intend to get people psyched about something so random, right?
Yeah.
Like I'm just like, say that in the room and just watch everyone react, right? And that's where the magic emerges, right? From that one thing, all of a sudden, like a million ideas start coming out, and everyone's like, "Oh my god, what about this? And what about So
Totally.
that's where those are the
when
moments.
you can connect a couple of data points, and then you could say, now I know this weird thing.
Right.
That is always an amazing moment.
Yeah.
So I switched from creative to strategy because I fell in love with the data, like it sounds like you have, and finding the insights for myself, which I think has probably cost me in terms of time, where I prefer to do the data digging myself to an extent versus just getting a printout, a readout that an analyst has done. I look at it and I read it and I'm like, all right, that's all interesting. But now let me see the raw data and see what else I can find. Are you elbows deep in the data as well? Are you doing the search yourself, or are you having it reported and then pushing with questions?
Yeah. I mean, sometimes I try, but like you said, like I just don't have the time. I'm typically working with, my design teams, my creative teams, etc. But I do have great partners, and we've built relationships where, they kind of know what I'm looking for. They kind of know how to roll, and, come back to the table with, things. They're like, hey, Craig, I found a whole bunch of stuff, but I thought this was really interesting. I thought you'd really like to see this.
But it's not just like a straight MRI demographic read.
Correct.
They're either 38 or 70, and they watched NCIS.
Right. Exactly. Right. Yeah. Right. And again, like that's relationship building. It's like, I don't need to know that. Like I'm not going to do much with that. And you can bury that in a brief somewhere, and we might look at that, and we might, it might help, but that's only one of many things that we need to string together to really, understand who we're talking to. So like for me, like I've always been very close to strategy. I mean, I call them my best friends. They're the people I actually hang out with. They're the people I enjoy going out for a drink with, because the conversation's always really robust, but also just kind of nerding out over the data. And then making it actionable, is kind of like my promise to them. Totally. Right? Yeah.
You'll do the digging, and I promise we will actually use it. If you get it this far, I promise it will mean something.
Exactly.
Do you ever get, do you turn them into, you mentioned the name Jenny, so I'm assuming you build some sort of an avatar or a persona. Mm-hmm. Do you get pushback from people that have come from kind of traditional marketing world where the persona, quote unquote, gets that negative reputation of like the, that really shallow, now we're going to talk about Shopper Susie, and Shopper Susie loves to clip coupons. And
I like that you use the word avatar. I would say like I tend to do it in a little bit more of a contemporary way. I've had pushback in the past, but like I think nothing of it. Like for me, I'm just very, I know what works for me, and I kind of get into a room, and I think I have a pretty good track record in being able to kind of bring those avatars to life. And what is exciting me right now with Web3 and everything that's going on there with metaverse and identity and everything, just like the idea of identity is becoming so much of kind of a pillar in the narrative of everything that's going on in our world today. Mm-hmm. And for me, I've always believed that people are very fluid. Shopper mom is not shopper mom in the evening, right? Like she could be dominatrix mom, like people have fluid identities, and we're only now starting to uncover that sort of fluidity, not just in gender and sexuality, but in personality, in preference, right?
In life stage,
right? And I think when you think about sort of the interoperability of what the metaverse is offering us at some point, when we finally figure it out, I think that the benefit for us as kind of people is being able to embrace that fluidity. But then the challenge to our industry is how do you then address that fluidity, right? And I find that to be incredibly exciting. I'm actually working on an article right now about it, also on a talk, hopefully maybe in Cannes or one of the big events. We'll get that on stage, talking about the idea that, you know, this identity and the fluidity and the challenge we as creators now have in front of us to be able to target people as they are in that moment, right? Mm-hmm. That gets me incredibly excited. When I think about that, my brain just goes into overdrive and I get really charged up.
Yeah. I mean, I think when you know what their life looks like as that matrix of inputs and decisions, and you know the exact coordinates of where your communication is going to land.
Exactly.
And it's like, so at this key point, we're going to say this thing. And that's the thing they need to remind them about us at that critical time.
Exactly.
It's it's like hitting a home run. You just know when it's off the bat, you're like, yes.
Exactly. Yeah. That's a great metaphor. You just know that sound, right? Like, the feeling of the bat, the feeling of the ball, the sound, you just know that everything converged. And that's kind of how I'm sort of selling the industry now to young folks. You know, I think what we do is somewhat commoditized. I think, you know, like every agency has great writers and great designers and great creatives. And we're all, you know, at this level, we are world class. We're all really good at what we do. Where I do think the differentiation comes into play, and you know, what I pride our agency at VMLY&R on is sort of it's the artful orchestration of all of those things. It's hitting those home runs. It's swinging the bat and calculating the pitch and you know, firing, you know, on all cylinders, and being able to take the work that spans the spectrum of, you know, a TV spot all the way down to the point of purchase, and making sure that every single one of those dots are connected because the consumers are aware of it, you know? And I think when, you know, we're in our agency bubble, we kind of like, we hand things off to like, okay, above the line and below the line.
I was just going to say, we're worried about the above the line, and then we're going to generate demand, and then you guys handle the below the line. It's like, well, I've already figured out the entire map.
Exactly.
Why would I hand it off at this point?
Exactly. Right. You know, and that's why I just hate those terms of like, oh, you're digital, you're traditional, you're radio, you're TV, you're social. Like, no, like, you know, I'm not a huge hockey fan, but I love the beauty of like the way a small, tiny puck is passed between, or even soccer, right? Like the beauty of being able to fluidly pass that puck or that ball across a whole number of different players until like finally someone knocks it in. You know, like that's kind of what we need to do. That fluidity of understanding how to take a big idea and really execute it and orchestrate it across. I mean, you know, back in the day before you and I were born, there was 3 mediums, right? Like you had TV, you had radio, print, but like now, hundreds, maybe thousands of touch points, literally, right? Like, so it's almost like playing a game with thousands of players on the field that all have to contribute in a meaningful way because, you know, like I said before, you never know where that conversion is going to hit, right? It could be social, it could be TV, it could be radio, it could be, you know, like some random thing we've never even thought about, you know, and that's what I love as well. I just love the breadth and the depth and the scope and the scale of it. Everything we do is just so big.
And I think that's what creates the challenge for strategy people, but also for creative people, where we want a one-page brief.
Right.
But the more context you have around it, the richer you can plug it into culture, or the richer you can make it make sense for that person, for the Jenny that you've just created. And that's the tension of like, I would really like to give you 500 slides. That's probably too much. And I would love to give you a one-page brief. That's definitely not enough, but I know that's what you need to get it distilled down to so you can, digest it. Right. So it's like figuring out the entire matrix and then saying like, yeah, but just look at these coordinates here for this, at this point, that's all I need you to look at.
Yeah. I mean, I've worked with some amazing strategists in my career. The one person I've worked with, we would lock ourselves in a room and she would come up with she would build briefs out of GIFs, literally rather than, creatives want the one-page brief because they just don't want to have to do a deep dive and they want to get to it, right?
They don't want to do the research of the research.
Right, the research of the research. What she would do, and we used to do this a lot, is we would take that one-page brief and she's like, I need more than a page to get this through to your teams. So we take all of the big points and we turn them into GIFs. So we find GIFs that would illustrate, and we put together basically a show, right? And we'd get in a room and okay, guys, let's do this. And we'd go through maybe 20 or 30 slides of GIFs, animated GIFs. And people just loved it, right? She was able to land her point. The creatives weren't getting bored. Everyone was enjoying, sort of the pageantry of it. I don't think the whole. I think strategists are creatives and should be as creative in giving their briefs as the creatives are in interpreting those briefs, right? I think we're in a creative industry, and there's nothing should be dry, nothing should be boring, nothing. Even if my head of data analytics is giving me a monthly readout on my client's, social whatever, that should be fun. That should be creative. That should be interesting, right? That's why we're doing this, right? So, I think when you can find someone like that, you just grab them and hold on to them because they're such a great creative partner in being able to make sure that your teams are set up for success,
Yeah. And if you showed the same amount of slides that were all data points with no analysis and no translation into something engaging.
Yeah, you lose them. Right?
Yeah. They're like, just give me the brief. I'm getting out of here.
Exactly. It's good for nothing. Yeah.
Well, Craig, I'm really grateful for your time. Thank you. I'm glad we finally were able to get this on the books.
Likewise. Same here. Thanks for.
Yeah, of course. Where can people have you online? Or where can people find you online?
I'm pretty active on Twitter. My full name, at my full name, Craig Elimeliah. I'm on Instagram, but that's kind of, I just kind of pop up there here and there, and I'm kind of using it a lot less. But Twitter's kind of my jam. LinkedIn a little bit for specific stuff, but that's usually just sharing other people's stuff. So.
Nice.
Find me on Twitter, and love to engage, love conversations, love observations, love challenges.
If people are going to invite Craig to things, just know he'll say yes in a moment. You got to be ready. You got to be ready to do it.
I will say yes in a moment, but if it's you got to be ready.
4 days later, he's forgotten. It's over.
Yep,
it's fair. All right, Craig. Great talking to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, man. Take care.
Strategy Inside Everything is produced by me, Adam Pierno. If you like what you've heard, leave a review wherever you listen to podcasts. Actually, I have no idea if that helps or if it's ever done anybody any good. If you really want to help the show and you like what you've heard, share it with someone else you think will dig it. That's the best way to help the show and keep the conversation growing. If you have an idea, a question, or want to push back, go to that'snotaninsight.com, where you can send me a message or leave me a voicemail that will be added to future shows. Music for the Strategy Inside Everything is by Saw Square Noise. For more information on me, you can go to adampierno.com to learn about my books, my speaking, and my consulting practice. Thanks for listening.